The question came like a thunderbolt, sharp, sudden, and impossible to ignore. In one moment, the air in the room grew heavy, every eye fixed on him, waiting for the truth that could either save or destroy everything. The words echoed louder than any scream. "Are you the father, Doc?" Doc had always been the man people trusted. Calm under pressure, steady in his choices, the kind of figure others leaned on when storms grew wild. His presence carried weight, not just because of his skills, but because of the quiet authority that followed him everywhere. For years, his life appeared unshaken, disciplined, and carefully guarded. People admired him, but very few ever truly knew him. And that was the way Doc wanted it. He believed his past was locked away, sealed tight behind walls only he could see. But walls have cracks, and secrets never stay buried forever. On that day, those walls shook. The room was full of voices before it happened, small talk, scattered laughter, the clinking of glasses, but when she stepped forward, everything changed. She wasn't loud, yet her voice carried farther than anyone expected. Her words didn't need volume. They had the force of a truth bomb, set to explode right in the middle of Doc's carefully constructed life. In an instant, his image, the respected man, the untouchable figure, was cracked wide open. Everyone in the room froze. The silence was louder than any sound they had made before. Some looked at her, wide-eyed. Some looked at Doc, searching for his reaction, while others simply stared at the floor, unsure whether to believe or to deny what they had just heard. And Doc, he didn't move. His breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat, stuck like a stone he couldn't swallow. His mind raced, but his body betrayed nothing, standing still like a statue under the crushing weight of judgment. The woman's gaze never broke. She wasn't shaking, she wasn't backing down, and she didn't stumble over her words. Her confidence made the claim even more dangerous. She had spoken in a way that gave no room for misunderstanding. Her words had pierced through every mask Doc had worn, pulling out a question that left everyone's heart pounding. Was he really the father? The thought burned in the air, and though no one said another word, everyone felt the same thing, that the ground beneath them had shifted. This was no simple accusation. It wasn't gossip to be brushed away. This was a challenge, a direct strike at the truth Doc had hidden for so long. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with fear, curiosity, and the heavy pressure of secrets demanding to be revealed. That question lingered in the room like smoke, refusing to fade. Every second that passed without an answer made the silence heavier, pressing down on everyone's chest. Eyes darted around the room, some sharp with accusation, some wide with disbelief, and others carrying a quiet hunger for scandal. It was the kind of moment that stripped away small talk and politeness, leaving only raw tension behind. All because of one sentence, one truth that had waited too long to come out. Doc stood still, but the storm inside him was violent. His jaw tightened, not from anger, but from the force it took to hold back every word racing through his mind. He wanted to speak, to shut down the question before it rooted itself deeper, but he also knew that words, once spoken, cannot be taken back. One slip, one wrong answer, and his life would unravel. And so he stayed silent, which, in its own way, was louder than any confession. The woman who had spoken didn't flinch. She held her ground, her voice still hanging in the air as if daring him to challenge it. Her eyes carried a weight that told everyone she wasn't bluffing. This wasn't a game for her, and the sharpness in her stare made that clear. The silence stretched between them, an invisible rope pulling tighter with every heartbeat. For a moment, it felt less like a conversation and more like a battle. One fought with expressions and unspoken truths. Someone coughed nervously from the corner, trying to cut the tension, but it only made things worse. The sound echoed too loud, too awkward, like a reminder that everyone was waiting, watching, judging. A man near the back whispered something under his breath, and even though no one could catch the words, it sent ripples across the room. Suspicion was spreading fast, crawling from one person to the next. The longer Doc stayed quiet, the more people began to believe there might be something to the claim. And then she spoke again, this time softer, but with even more power. Her voice was steady, stripped of anger or accusation, yet firm enough to slice through the thick silence. She repeated the question, slower this time, as if forcing the truth out of him. "Are you the father, Doc?" The way she said it turned the moment into something far bigger than just personal drama. It was a demand for truth, not just for her, but for everyone listening. Doc's lips parted slightly, but no words came. He felt the weight of dozens of eyes pressing into him, each one like a spotlight burning his skin. His silence had already become an answer for some. To them, hesitation was guilt. To others, his refusal to speak was a sign of dignity, maybe even strength. But Doc knew better. He knew silence was dangerous. It gave power to the question, gave room for rumors to grow, gave his enemies the perfect weapon. Still, he couldn't bring himself to say yes, and he couldn't bring himself to say no. The room shifted again when someone finally spoke up, breaking the standoff. "Doc, say something," the voice urged, filled with both concern and frustration. It was as if everyone else had been holding their breath, waiting for someone brave enough to push the moment forward. Now, the demand was out in the open. There was no escape. Doc raised his eyes slowly, scanning the faces around him. He saw doubt. He saw curiosity. He saw fear. But what cut the deepest was the disappointment already forming in some of their expressions, as if they had already judged him guilty before hearing his truth. That was the cruelty of moments like this. The question itself had the power to destroy, even without proof. And then came the shift. The woman who had spoken stepped closer, her voice now trembling, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she was carrying. Her calm broke just enough to reveal the raw pain beneath her strength. "You can't hide forever," she whispered, though the whole room heard it. "If you are the father, then admit it. If you're not, then say it. But don't stand there like a stranger to your own life." The words landed like a knife. Everyone leaned in, sensing that the standoff was reaching a breaking point. The air was so heavy it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Doc's silence was no longer just his choice, it was an answer that others were beginning to shape for him. The truth had cornered him, and the confrontation was only beginning to unfold. The silence had already cut deep, but now it began to bleed into something darker: suspicion. A simple question had cracked open the surface, and now the doubt was spreading like fire. People who once looked at Doc with admiration now studied him with sharp, searching eyes. They wanted proof. They wanted denial. They wanted something that would make sense of the storm that had just been unleashed. But the longer he held his tongue, the more the weight of silence began to crush the room. A single accusation could break reputations, but this was heavier than that. This was a wound that threatened to expose more than just Doc's present. It threatened to drag out ghosts from his past. He had lived his life with precision, with a discipline that made him untouchable. But here, in this room, under these eyes, every layer of protection was peeling away. The controlled man, the respected figure, now looked like someone hiding in plain sight. Whispers began to move like a current through the room. They were low at first, barely audible, but they grew bolder with each passing second. Could it be true? One voice muttered, "Why doesn't he just deny it?" Another whispered. The questions multiplied, each one feeding on the silence. Doubt didn't need evidence, it only needed space. And Doc's refusal to speak gave it more than enough room to grow. The woman who had brought the storm refused to retreat. She stood tall, her presence alone enough to fuel the fire. She didn't need to shout anymore. The damage had been done. Her claim had taken root, and now the people around them were watering it with curiosity and fear. She looked at Doc not with anger, but with something far sharper: expectation. It was the gaze of someone who knew the truth already and was only waiting for him to catch up to it. Doc's chest rose and fell, each breath heavier than the last. He wanted to control the situation, to seize the narrative, but the power had shifted. No longer was he the man others leaned on. In this moment, the authority belonged to her, the woman who dared to bring truth into the open. And worse, it belonged to the crowd, a jury without a courtroom, each pair of eyes ready to render judgment before he had a chance to defend himself. One man finally broke the tension with a sharp question. his voice cutting through the whispers. "Doc, is it true?" he demanded, no hesitation, no gentleness. The directness of it made everyone flinch, as if the question itself carried more weight than the answer. Doc's head turned, his expression still locked in stone, but his silence screamed louder than any denial. For the first time, his legendary composure seemed less like strength and more like fear. The woman stepped closer again, this time her voice cracking slightly. Not with weakness, but with a desperation that no one had expected. "You owe me the truth," she said. "You owe yourself the truth." Her words weren't just aimed at him anymore. They were aimed at the entire room. The plea was raw, human, and it wrapped itself around everyone listening. Even those who doubted her felt the pull of her conviction. Doc's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body trembling with the weight of everything unsaid. He had survived battles tougher than this, storms that could have broken lesser men. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was about identity, about the part of himself he had buried and tried to forget. And now that buried part was clawing its way out, dragging him into the light whether he was ready or not. The atmosphere thickened until it felt unbearable. The whispers returned sharper now, slicing through the air like knives. Each whisper was a judgment, each stare a verdict. The room itself felt smaller, as though the walls were closing in, trapping Doc in a cage built of secrets and lies. He looked at her, then at the faces around him, and for the first time, his mask cracked. His eyes betrayed something: pain, fear, maybe even guilt. That flicker was all it took. The crowd leaned in, sensing weakness, sensing truth. The woman's face softened just for a moment, as if she saw not just the man standing before her, but the man he had been, the one who had once made choices that now demanded their price. The confrontation had shifted into something larger than just a claim. It had become a battle for truth itself, and Doc was no longer in control. The air was electric, humming with tension, ready to snap at the slightest touch. One more word, one more glance, one more slip of truth, and the fragile silence holding the room together would shatter. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. And Doc, caught in the middle of it all, understood that the moment he opened his mouth, nothing would ever be the same again. The room had turned into a storm without thunder, a battlefield without weapons. Every face was locked on Doc, waiting for the word that would either free him or bind him forever. But the longer the silence stretched, the heavier it became, pressing on every chest, making every breath feel like a betrayal. What had begun as a question was no longer just about fatherhood, it was about truth, legacy, and the kind of man Doc really was. When the masks were stripped away, the air buzzed with a strange kind of energy. The kind that comes when people know they are standing on the edge of revelation. Nobody wanted to blink, nobody wanted to miss the moment when the truth finally broke free. Even the smallest movements, the tapping of a foot, the shifting of a chair, sounded deafening against the stillness that ruled the space. And at the center of it all, Doc remained frozen, his silence drawing out the tension like a taut rope ready to snap. He opened his mouth once, just enough to draw in a shaky breath. The entire room leaned forward, hearts racing, eyes burning holes into him. But no words came. His lips closed again, and that failure to speak sent waves of frustration across the crowd. A woman gasped softly, as if she couldn't believe a man like him, steady, strong, respected, could be brought to his knees by one question. The disbelief in her gasp stung like a wound, and Doc felt it even without looking at her. The woman who had asked the question stepped closer, her shadow stretching across the floor until it merged with his. Her eyes were fierce, but there was something else hidden in them now, something almost fleeting. She wanted an answer as much as everyone else did, but her need was deeper, more personal. She had risked everything to speak the words aloud, and now her own fate hung in the balance of his response. For her, this wasn't just spectacle, it was survival. Doc single quotes as breath grew heavier. He felt the weight of years pressing against him, years he had kept carefully hidden, years he had convinced himself were buried too deep to matter. But here they were, clawing their way back, refusing to stay silent any longer. Every memory, every choice, Every night he had looked in the mirror and wondered if his secrets would one day catch him. It all crashed down now, demanding payment. His silence wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about the impossible choice between truth and destruction. The crowd was restless now, shifting uneasily, murmurs crawling like vines through the air. Some were impatient, demanding an answer, while others were terrified of hearing one. For them, the truth was both salvation and a curse. They wanted it, but they also feared what it would do once spoken. That paradox only added to the chaos, tightening the noose of suspense. Then came the breaking point. Someone in the back slammed a hand on the table, the sound cracking like lightning. "Enough!" The voice shouted, raw with anger and desperation. "Tell us, Doc. Tell us now." The demand roared through the room, shaking loose the last of the restraint that had kept the tension contained. Gasps followed, eyes widened, and now every ounce of attention bore down on him with merciless force. Doc lifted his head. For the first time since the question had been asked, his eyes no longer dodged, no longer hid. They met hers steady, unflinching, and filled with something that made her catch her breath. His mask was gone. What replaced it was raw, vulnerable, and frighteningly human. The room seemed to hold still, as if time itself paused to hear the truth. But just as the first word began to form on his lips, the silence shattered not with his voice, but with the sharp cry of someone else. The sound came from the doorway, unexpected and piercing, turning every head in an instant. The cry belonged to another figure, one who had just entered, eyes burning with knowledge that promised to change everything. The interruption was like a blade cutting through the fragile moment, leaving everyone on edge, desperate for what would come next. Doc's words died in his throat. The answer that had been ready to break free was swallowed again, buried beneath this new twist. The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping, people rising from their seats, the storm that had been silent now crashing in every direction. But even in the noise, one truth remained clear. The question still hung in the air, unanswered, more dangerous than ever. And as the scene froze in the minds of everyone present, the final echo was not what Doc had said, but what still lingered, heavy and unresolved. "Are you the father, Doc?"